This is Joel Moses, President of the Photographic Historical Society of New England, and I welcome all of you into another presentation we are going to have, which I think you will find very enjoyable. For those of you who are already members, we certainly welcome you, and for those who are not and might have an interest, we are certainly interested in expanding our member base, so please consider. I will turn the presentation over to Dana and she'll take it from there. Thank you very much and welcome.
Thanks, Joel. Hi, everyone. Welcome to all the camera clubs from Canada, Australia, Japan, whoever happens to be joining us tonight. Before I introduce our speaker, Bob Currier, just a few announcements. The active screen is being recorded. This will be available on YouTube at a later date. If you haven't used Zoom before, you can see if you move your cursor or down to the bottom of your screen, there is a chat, sort of a speech bubble icon, and that's how we're going to be fielding questions tonight. So during the presentation, as Bob is speaking, if you could just enter your question into chat and make sure you address it to everyone, which is the default, so that we can all see it. And as we pause between slides, I'll relay those questions to Bob. Keep yourself muted, please, until the end of the presentation. And speaker view at the top is best for this presentation instead of gallery. Gallery might be better at the end, and you can control that at the top right. Okay, so Bob Currier has been taking photographs for 5 decades. His subjects vary, but he's best known for his fireground photographs, which are taken at active fire scenes where emergency services are operating. He's been awarded numerous prizes from Black and White Magazine and the Newburyport Art Association, and has exhibited at the Fairfield Museum and History Center in Fairfield, Connecticut. His fireground photography is highly valued by firefighters and used for training purposes at fire departments around New England. He has a background in the fire service himself, which he will tell you more about in the 60s and 70s. And I think you'll enjoy his powerful images. He has been a PHSNE member for 3 months. So welcome, Bob. Take it away.
Okay, are we on?
Yes, Bob and Anita.
Okay, great. All right. Go ahead.
Oh, first of all, I want to thank the Photographic Society of New England for inviting me to present my work. I got started while I was in high school by going downtown to the local Lexington Fire Department with my next door neighbor and riding. He used to be the driver of the rescue truck. So 3 of us used to go down and ride with him to all the fires in Lexington back in the late 50s, early 60s. I went to Boston to photograph fires in the early 1960s by a guy who put a radio under the seat of his car. We'd go in and we would listen to the dispatches from the fire department, and then we would respond. And that way we would be on the scenes fairly quickly and get good photographs. In 1964, I moved to California, Sunnyvale, and I joined the Santa Clara County Central Fire District Department, which was a combination fully paid and volunteer firefighters. And I was there for 6 years. It was a very busy department, very busy station, and I learned a great deal about firefighting as well as how to anticipate what a fire does so that I can be ahead of the fire photographically. So if I understand what's going to happen, I can present myself or position myself to get those photographs. I moved to Western Massachusetts in 1970, and I started to drive to Boston on weekends with some of the same guys I saw years before. The 70s and 80s were a very intense era in Boston for arson. And I found myself in many dangerous and precarious situations. So I want to show you some of the the breadth of my photos that I've taken, I have over 20,000 slides alone of fires, firefighters, old apparatus, and hydrants. I have a knack for gaining access to scenes that seem otherwise prohibitive to get into. You'll see some of them. Some of the photos are used by the National Fire Protection Association and other fire departments for training purposes with my slides. While many of my slides, the sheer bravery of firefighters is really shown. While showing this presentation, I welcome questions during the presentation as the flow allows.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go.
All right, and take a sip of water. And share and. Okay.
This first,
Hold on. Okay. All right. Can I get a thumbs up, Ben? Okay, thank you.
okay, good. This is I've got a huge collection of these old hand pumpers from the 1800s. This is how they used to fight fires way back when. They had teams of people with their leather buckets throwing water into this thing and pumping it and getting huge streams of water. And that's how they did it back in the 1870s, 1860s, 50s, 40s, until apparatus became mobile in 1900.
Okay.
The first fire is an Irish and Israeli embassy in Boston, Newbury Street. This was obviously an arson fire where somebody torched both the Irish and the Israeli embassies. And this really shows a lot of the ladder work that the city of Boston did. The city of Boston ladders each floor of a building in order to provide an access for firefighters inside to get out if things go wrong. In this picture here, you can see that they're not wearing much sophisticated apparatus going up into these fires.
Okay.
The Lincoln Street fire was in Boston in 1971 and was in the Leather District. I was on my way home on a cold November night. It was starting to snow when the box came in, the fire alarm box. So I went down the street and I parked my car. And this was the fire long afterwards, but it shows the intense amount of apparatus in the street. One firefighter was killed in this fire. And it's really a good example of how congested the city of Boston is with all the fire apparatus.
Take a sip of
water. This fire was at the Massachusetts Mills in Lowell. It burned about 6 or 7 mill buildings down that night. And I was working in the buildings ahead of it. And I went home, turned on my fire radio, and Lowell was going crazy with calling for help. So I drove back to the fire, and this thing was just ripping along. This is the Hotel Vendome. This is a famous fire in the city of Boston in 1972. There were 9 firefighters killed in this fire, and this is the beginning of the fire. When I first got there, it was going on the upper floors. And you can see here that they're just trying to climb up into the building. It's a vacant building that was under renovation for the Vendome Hotel. And the basement of the building, the contractor had gone ahead and taken out the supports of the building. And taking out those supports, they kept pouring water in, and going into the building with more and more manpower. And then what happened is, next slide. Okay. This is the fire when it was going in the upper floors. And then all of a sudden, it collapsed. On all of the corner of the building, the 6 floors came down into one little area. And inside of that area were literally dozens of firefighters. This shows you the intensity of the bricks and everything. That was a 6-story building that came down. And it just crushed. This is ladder 15 that was right next to the building.
We have a question.
Go ahead.
How many stories up can a very tall ladder truck go?
It can go up, it's a 100-foot ladder, which means it can go up through 9 floors. 9 floors is about the maximum.
keep going.
This is the chief of the city of Boston. And this picture here, he just recognized the fact that he had lost a series of firefighters in the building. Here they were. This shows the sensitivity of these guys digging through the rubble by hand, digging these men out. This guy was alive, wrapped them in a sheet, took him out, took him down, and then onto the hospital. This one here was a picture that I took. It was the cover of a Firehouse magazine in 1972 in June, and it was used as submitted by Firehouse for a Pulitzer Prize. And I made it all the way up to the top list, but I didn't quite make it, but it was a good try. This is a fire on Commercial Street in Boston that shows, again, the congestion, the very, very large, what they call deck guns on these trucks. They're 2,000 gallons a minute that they throw water, and they really nail a lot of fires.
Sorry, Bob, a question from previous slides. Someone wanted to know how many firefighters were saved during that fire.
They had 9, like I said, 9 killed, and there was around 20 that were seriously injured.
Laura Russo is asking, what camera format film do you typically use? And also, what focal length lenses are best for photographing fires?
All of these photos were taken with, the film is Kodachrome film, slide film. And I used that exclusively for all these pictures. The cameras I used, basically a 28 millimeter lens or a 35 millimeter lens lets you get in close and get a good photograph. And I use fixed focus lenses. I didn't use adjustable lenses at all. And a lot of people today really use big adjustable lenses, but I like the old fashioned way because you get a little bit better clarity.
A few more questions before, is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. Someone wants to know if that was Chief Paul a couple slides back.
That is correct. George
Yes.
Paul. Yeah, that's him.
Correct.
That's George Paul, City of Boston.
And Steve Zane says, hi, Bob. Why was there so much arson at that time in Boston?
Why was there so much arson is it's a combination of arson for profit, arson for sport. A lot of the kids used to set fires in buildings just because they had nothing else to do and nobody punished them for it. So then they had a group of people in Boston setting fires just for the heck of it. And it was amazing. The fire department had to cut back because of Proposition 2.5, cut back the amount of manpower by about a third. And these guys wanted to start fires to show the need to put them back to work. It didn't work, but they just went on a rampage for about a year and a half setting fires.
One more question. David Starkman wants to know what type of camera.
These were all taken with Nikons and Nicormats, were my camera of choice at that time. I've since gone to a large format, medium format cameras that I've been in the last 20 years or 30 years been using. But this is all just a plain old 35 millimeter Nikons.
Good. Okay. So we'll go this way, north end.
This is a fire on Marlborough Street. Marlborough Street in Boston is the high rent district. There are 6-story brick buildings built in the 1875 era to 1900. And occasionally they catch fire. And in this particular one was Sunday morning. This is 7:30 in the morning. And it was a dramatic fire. They had a great rescue of a young lady that came out the top of the building and slipped and fell, and her leg went through an iron railing trim edge of the top of the building. They had to go up and rescue her and untangle her and get her out. They saved her life. This fire was in the American Barrel Factory in Chelsea in 1974. This is the fire after about an hour of its progressing. It started on the extreme left around the corner, down the street, and it just worked its way up through all these buildings. This fire was the Alexander Hotel on Dudley Street in Roxbury. This is one end of the fire, and the fire goes all the way down to the left. And the fire was not in that part of the building. And all the people in the building were going out that side of the building. There was around 20 kids on the fire escapes with their mothers and fathers. And the fire escape started to pull away from the building. So a ladder company was pulling in, and they took the ladder and they positioned it against the fire escape, pinning it to the building. Then all the firemen went up and they just manhandled all these kids, getting them out of there. Nobody got killed. It's amazing. This is a fire in a lumberyard on Tremont Street in Boston, 1961, when I first started going to Boston. And the box came in and we went up the street, and I could not believe the intensity of the fire. A fire truck in the foreground ended up having the side of it burned off because it was just too close. This is a fire in Lowell, Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Mills. This burned about 4 or 5 buildings down also. And it was quite a spectacular fire. And it's interesting that the fire started underneath the elevator shaft, and the sprinkler system was off for repairs. So the fire got roaring through the buildings. This is a fire in the shoe factory district in Lynn in 1983. The fire started in an 8-story building, burned out of control. The fire burned out of control for 14 hours. And you'll see that as we progress through it, we go into the next day. This is a building that burned, this was like 4 or 5 hours after the fire started. It jumped into this other 6-story building, and it just marched its way through. It's running its own little world. This is the next day. This is called the VAMP building on the left. It's the largest shoe factory in the world. And it was converted to affordable housing. And the fire jumped into the top floor. And they used all the ladder trucks and ladder pipes to throw water up there, and then to keep the fire on the top floor of the building. This is the day after the plant shoe factory fire in Jamaica Plain. The temperature this day, well, first of all, the night before, I was listening to the fire, and it was in a rainstorm. And they came over the radio and they said that somebody was going around attacking and robbing all the photographers. So I decided not to go. So I went the next day and I found a firefighter I knew, and he got a cop to be assigned to me while I was taking my pictures. And right about now, the temperature started to drop and all this water became ice. And you can see the amazing amount of ice that developed in a couple of hours. This
We have a question, sorry.
Yes.
David Starkman wants to know that since Kodachrome was a relatively slow film, did you use a tripod for most of those night photos, or a very fast lens, or both?
I used my tripod. They used to call me the baby photographer because I used to lug a tripod around everywhere. So you have to take more time to take a picture, but you get a much better picture. This is the Clinton Market, downtown Boston, between the Expressway and Atlantic Avenue. And it was an old marketplace. And it started, and I was in Fitchburg at the time. I was at work, and I was a medical sales representative at the time. And I heard this fire come in. So I said, all right, Fitchburg's up on a hill. So I looked out down towards Boston, and you could see this enormous column of smoke coming up. And I'm 30 miles away. So I went to the fire. So this is how it really progressed. This fire was in the Reedville car shops in the Reedville section on the Milton line in 1972. The fire was started by arson. They think kids were playing in one of the vacant buildings. And it burned about 9 to 10 buildings down. This fire was in the J.P. Squires meatpacking plant in East Cambridge, 1963. I was down in Westwood riding a fire truck at the time on a weekend, and the call came in, and they went over the radio and they said that Cambridge has an enormous fire going, and all of the towns around were going to Cambridge. So I said, I'm going to drive up there. So I drove up. And this building that's burning is about 5 or 6 hours after the fire started, and it's come down the street and wrapped around. In the next slide, you'll see how the fire started down the end or up above where that ladder truck is up on the building. And it marched all the way through all these buildings, down around the corner. And that's the way it looked the next day. When I went up to the top floor of a commercial building that did not burn and photographed this one. It's interesting the way the bricks came down. It's a fire in Haverhill in a shoe factory. And Haverhill tends to do everything themselves. So they basically put one line in the back of the building and throw water at it. But it's hard to believe. I got there, the fire was on the first floor and it went all through the building. This is a fire at the Roby Industrial Park in Wakefield. It was 14 degrees outside. And then the fire started, and we responded when the city of Boston went to Wakefield with a whole bunch of fire apparatus. So we figured we'll go. So we got there, and they burned the Roby Industrial Park to the ground. It was started by a disgruntled worker who got laid off, and he felt incorrectly, torched one of the buildings. And in the wind and the cold of that night, it just wiped out the industrial park. This fire was in Washington Street in Haverhill. This fire started at the very back next to the river. They were renovating a building, and they had a dumpster in between the buildings. And the dumpster was filled with debris from the building. Some kids torched the dumpster. The fire went up into both buildings, and then the wind took it all the way up to the street. This fire was a mill gas explosion in Methuen on Christmas Day, 1992. This was a spectacular fire, and that's the city of Lawrence's ladder truck on the left. And it was just amazing how much, it was very cold, how much ice there was around here. And it was just an amazing thing to photograph. This is another lumberyard in Ipswich. Lumberyards burn real quick, and it's a classic example in these small towns of not having enough apparatus and equipment to get to them. So this is the fourth building that burned in the lumberyard. This fire is Mystic Pier in Charlestown, 1978. Pier fires are very, very difficult because the creosote that they use to keep the water out and insulate them is very, very thick. They have to be able to drive all kinds of heavy trucks on top of these piers. So when a fire starts, it goes under the pier, and you can see the amount of smoke it makes. It's enormous. You can see that nobody's wearing any oxygen tanks, nobody's wearing any breathing apparatus. They just are digging holes through the decks, trying not to control the fire. To vent it, right. This is the boat, the Firefighter. This was owned by the port of Massport at the time. Now we go into a bunch of plane crashes. I was fortunate or unfortunate enough to photograph these. This is the Delta plane crash, which resulted when the pilot and co-pilot were coming into Logan, and they were chit-chatting back and forth, and they were not paying attention. And they hit the end of the runway with the plane, and it snapped the tail off, and the plane just catapulted down the runway and burst into flames and killed all 88 people on the plane. Excuse me. That's the tail of the engine on the right. This is people putting cloths on top of the burned bodies. Is that so they could identify them? The pictures I took of this fire were used by the National Fire Protection Association to set up a standard when a plane crash happens to identify where all the bodies are on the runway and then put them back in the same order in a warehouse so that when people come to identify their loved ones, they're not looking at all kinds of different bodies. They can go to a specific area where that person was on the plane and they can minimize the impact of recognizing these people. This plane was a Pan American air freight plane coming into Logan Airport, took off from New York going to Europe, and it was full of freight. It was a 727, I believe, 707. And there was a canister of nitric acid in the plane that broke, and it ate its way down through into other items in the freight part of the aircraft, and the fumes went up to the cockpit. The pilot and co-pilot decided to head for Boston. That was the closest airport. They almost made it when they hit the end of the runway, and then they were later confirmed to be all dead when they hit the runway. So nobody survived this one. There's only 3 people on the plane. This is but a Boston's. In 1947, they bought about 25 or 30 of these old hose wagons that were very small, quick. They could get into alleys and all around the city of Boston. And then they would use that huge deck gun on the back, hook it up with water, and away they went.
We have a question.
Go ahead.
From Laura Russo. What range of f-stops and shutter speeds did you use to capture these images during the day as well as at night?
During the day, it's primarily slow speed film. So it's 125th or 60th of a second at f8, f11. This is in a shade of a building. So this is probably f5, 6. And depending on how much light there was, I would use the meter on the camera, and I would bracket the photographs. 2, if it's a good picture, 2 on either side, or sometimes 3 on either side of what I thought was the proper exposure. Then you've got a really good sample of that picture.
Could you tell us a little bit about why Kodachrome was such a good choice for the fire photography?
It was, first of all, we're photographing fires and fire trucks, and they're red. And Kodachrome does a great job with reds. And it's a film that's very slow in speed, which means when you print it and you blow it up, you don't lose any grain. I mean, these are grainless pictures.
Did we do engine 8? We saw engine 8, yeah. Okay.
Excellent. This is engine 4's wagon. This is at a big fire at Summer Street in Boston. In the middle of winter, they burned down a Ralph Pill electrical supply company. And the fire came in and it just raged through the building. Again, sprinkler system was down, inoperative. They were working on the system and a fire started.
And they have wooden ladders.
Yeah, wooden ladders. This is a ladder truck from Charlestown, and you can see it's got a wooden ladder on the top of it. And they bought a whole bunch of ladder trucks that had 85-foot wooden aerials. The reason they use the wooden aerials is in many of the residential sections of Boston, they had telephone poles, and they had wires. And if this ladder went up and a wooden ladder touched a hot wire, it wouldn't electrocute everybody on the ladder. Whereas a metal ladder, you gotta be really careful. This is Chelsea. This is a couple of American La France pieces that they had that were almost brand new at the time. And they were so proud of them. And they were just pumping away at a fire.
We have another question.
Go ahead.
Let me just scroll up here. From Laura. Can you speak to the challenges of photographing fires at night? Was the light from the flames enough to compensate for the lack of daylight?
Not all the time. And you needed to sometimes really bracket on the long side, since it's such a slow speed film. I wasn't using high speed Ektachrome or one of those high speed films. So the fire department would light the building, like this fire here is being lit up by the lighting plant from the city of Malden. So I would have enough light with a tripod. This is probably taken an eighth of a second or a quarter of a second, and wide open, and I would get the picture. But you got to be really careful taking pictures at night because it's hard and easy.
So you didn't talk about.
Oh yeah,
Wait a minute.
this fire was.
Let me hold on.
Go ahead,
Ask her if she has another.
Dana. Do you have another question?
Yes, just a comment. Reich says that in the Kodachrome era, National Geographic photographers never went anywhere without a red jacket to put on someone.
That's funny.
And I think this is Ben. You discussed exposure bracketing, but what about framing in the dark?
I would use the frame of the pit. I would use the image from side to side. I was careful not to use wide angle lenses and take all kinds of wide pictures and then cut it down later. I would prefer to use the image of the camera and get all of that in on one picture. For example, this one here, there's a flagpole in front of the church. And there's a red flag on it. And that was done by a group called the John Mansville Group out of Maine that went through Eastern Massachusetts burning buildings one night in 1971. This is one of the ones they burned.
Did you answer that guy's question? All right, go ahead.
This church was the Greek church in Newburyport. And this fire started when the candles they had in the lobby, one of them melted down and all the wax came down onto the floor and got the floor going, got the vestibule going, and then went right up through the building. This was a tragic fire. There you can see the vestibule just roaring along. Now that fire goes up, right up through the belfry, comes out the top.
Still going? Okay.
Yeah, by this time the fire is pretty well gone. The building is in through the attic, completely wiping it out. And during the time of this fire is the Yankee homecoming parade that was going on in Newburyport. And when the fire came in, all the fire apparatus was in a parade. And then they called all the fire apparatus down to the fire. So we had access to a bazillion fire trucks. It was amazing, but it didn't help. And that's what the church looked like the next day. Completely gone. These are firefighters at work. This is a pump operator. And these are a couple of guys, and these are both officers. The guy on the right is from Cambridge, and the guy on the left is from Watertown. The firefighter on the left, the lieutenant, is from Boston. And he is looking at a bunch of kids throwing rocks at the fire truck, and he's disgusted with them. That's why the look on his face is the way it is. The guy on the right was from Watertown Fire Department, had a fire at a school.
We have a comment, sorry, from David Starkman about stereo photography and how if you look, because you're looking into the magnified stereo slides, in hand viewer, the grainless aspect of Kodachrome and the red made it ideal for stereo slides.
Well, I didn't do any stereo slides, but I just took the slides themselves. But this picture here is a group of guys, 1971, 72, on Aerial Tower 1, which was the first aerial tower set up by the city of Boston. And these guys are very privileged firefighters to be lucky enough to be on that thing. This is a fire in East Boston in a warehouse. And I thought it was rather humorous of the guy with his hands behind his back talking to the guy running the deck gun. This is a battalion. Sorry, question. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Daniel.
Can you tell me what the difference is between an aerial tower and like a ladder truck?
Okay, a ladder truck is a vertical it's just a plain ladder, an aerial tower. At the end of the ladder, they put a bucket, and the bucket can hold 2 to 3 firefighters, which they use to direct the stream of water more accurately than just squirting it out the top of the ladder.
Got it. Thank you.
This guy was a real character. He was an older district chief from Boston, from Charlestown. And I love his face always scowled that way when he was at a fire. This is a hydrant from a hydrant yard in a mill complex fire in Lowell. This is the next day. And you can see how this is done in 1870. They put these hydrant systems in, and then they keep them charged with water, and they work. And the next picture is the end of my show, but the hydrant on the left is a Lowry hydrant, which they plug into the street, and then the water comes up. So that way, during snowstorms, they always plow the middle of the street. So you have access to water all the time. And that's it. And now we have questions.
If there's any questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You can unmute yourselves to clap if you would like to.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Thank you.
Well done, Veronica. Thank you.
I'm Lily. All right.
So I don't see any other questions typed in. If people would like to, you're welcome to speak your question. We can just take turns.
Sure.
And let us know where you're from.
Come on, Steve, I already have my question. Here, undo.
Hi, Steve.
Will you put your
Go ahead, Steve.
We have somebody who's raised their hand.
Oh, I have to look at participants, sorry.
Really?
Hang on.
Why don't we start?
I'd like to ask a question, and the simple question is whether there's any commonality among the personalities who are firefighters that you detected.
The common personality amongst firefighters is, yes, there is. And it's an innate desire to be a public servant and to help people in their specialty field. Some people become policemen, some people become firemen. And firefighters become firefighters. And they are very, very, very much orientated towards helping people, and that's their background.
Bob, I've got a question for you.
Sure.
When they saw that, when the firemen would see the camera, did they look at you like you had two heads, or were they kind of used to seeing the news people around, or what was kind of, how did the camera make them feel?
Basically, the firefighters, they would ignore you and just do their work. There were so many photographers in the city of Boston, excuse me, had a major fire. They didn't bother anybody. They would look right at you if I said, hey, look at me, I'm gonna take your picture. Then they would look at me. There's a city of Boston firefighters for the city. Billy Noonan is a very famous photographer, and he would constantly line the guys up and take their picture. So they were used to it. So they were pretty good about it.
And folks, just mute yourself if you're not asking a question so the picture doesn't shift back and forth. Anyone else? I don't see who's raising their hand.
I have a question and an answer and a statement.
Go ahead.
Bob, did you get to the Chinatown
That's what
fire?
I'm missing.
Paul Christian was the chief. 3 or 4 buildings went up
Which fire was this now?
in Chinatown.
No, I got there. I was out of town. I heard it on the radio, and I came in and I got to that Paul Christian's fire after it was knocked down.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the statement was, I was coming on the job in Mansfield.
Yep.
Around the time of the fire. You had one of the early photographs was that fire truck that was just just covered with ice.
Yep. Yeah.
I remember the guys in my department said, let's go in and check that fire out. And that's all we wanted to see was that fire truck.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's funny. That's great.
There's a question from Laura who just wants to know, were your images sold to newspapers and magazines?
Yes, I sold my first picture in 1961 to United Press International. I went to the town of Air Massachusetts, which was burning down. And I photographed a bunch of stuff, and a guy came up to me and said, I work for United Press International. If you could take your pictures to Boston, they'll process them and we'll buy some. So we went to Boston, up into the 6th floor of this building on Washington Street. They developed our film, and they paid us $10 a picture for it back then. But that was like 50 years ago. It's a lot of money.
Peter's Pete Berg has got his hand up.
So purchase, I guess.
I can't see the hands and the participants. Where do I look for that?
Well, I'm looking at a combination of the grid. So if I look at the gallery view, and Dana, this might be actually a good time for you to mention about the gallery view in case anyone hasn't seen
true.
the gallery view.
Yeah, up in the top right, there's a view. When you can switch to gallery view, you can toggle back and forth between gallery and speaker. In speaker, whoever's making noise fills the screen.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Question.
Go ahead.
Okay, my name is Pete Berg. I'm from Maitland, Florida.
Nice.
I have a question. Do you own the rights to your photographs, or are they owned by the city of Boston?
I own the rights to all of my photographs.
You do?
Every one of them. Yeah.
Awesome.
So you were not doing work for hire, or you were an independent contractor?
I was an independent contractor, and I would select, like, I like working with the National Fire Protection Association because they paid a lot more money than anybody else. So I would photograph something, and one of the guys I chased fires with in Boston worked for the NFPA, National Fire Protection Association. He would say, we want those slides. So I would take them down to the NFPA. They'd write me a check. They'd make a copy and give them back to me.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would keep the rights all the time. Although they would have rights, they could use them if they wanted to.
Right.
I wanted to ask, I presume that you're no longer taking pictures of fires. And if I'm correct, I would like to know when you stopped and why.
I didn't stop.
Oh.
I went to 2 fires in the last week.
No.
Oh.
Last month, I should say, here in Newburyport. I just changed format to, I have a 6x7 Pentax, a Hasselblad, and I like using those 2 cameras because of the larger format. And I've switched to black and white and color film also. So I know I haven't stopped. My next show will show stuff.
Ask him which way.
Errol.
Come on. Get in there, baby.
Thank you.
The question from David Starkman wants to know, what year did you switch to medium format, and what camera and film did you favor at that time?
I was given a Hasselblad by my wife at the time. In 1998, I think 1998, switched to a 2.25, and I've been using it ever since.
And Laura wants to know, did you process your own film, or did you send it to a lab?
All the Kodachrome slides I did not process at all. They all went to Kodak. But I print all my own black and whites. I have a lab that does all my developing. I have a friend of mine that gave me a ton, 220, instead of 120 film, it's 220 film, which is a lot longer. And those very long negatives. So I had a lab process them and I print them. And I did a series of mill buildings with those rolls of film he gave me.
You haven't switched to digital?
I have a digital camera and I use it as a backup.
Why?
Well, I just
Why do you use it as a back? Why have you not made the jump
Do it.
digital?
I just love printing my own film.
Okay.
I really like doing it. I have a big lab and I share it with a couple of other guys, and I can work there in peace and quiet. And that's why I've switched to black and white also. And the black and white film I use I used Panatomic X for years, very slow speed film, and I've since switched to different films, but I like printing.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ben has a question. What came first, your love for photography or your love for the fire department? How did you get started on each aspect, or photo or fire?
Well, since my next door neighbor took me into the fire station before I even started taking pictures, I guess my love for the fire department started first.
Good answer.
I have a question. What are the firefighters and fire departments looking for in your pictures when it comes to training? Like,
I do
how
a
do
lot,
they teach?
a lot of pictures I take of how not to do it. For example, the classic is when they're ventilating a building and they're breaking the glass on the outside. And I have several pictures of the firefighters taking a pole, putting it over their head and breaking the glass. The problem is the air rushes in, a backdraft starts and blows out all over them. So that's a classic case of how not to do it. A lot of towns do it because they don't have many fires, don't understand how a backdraft exists and how it can cause a problem. Hi, Steve.
Steve, you have a question?
I do. So these days, I mean, you started when things were relatively, let's just say, lawless. Do fire photographers need to be certified? Do fire departments have their own these days?
Question.
A lot of fire department, bigger cities have their own fire department photographers, but all the small towns have somebody, they usually hire somebody from the newspaper that they use because they're out there taking pictures. So it depends on the size of the community. But basically, the smaller towns and cities go out and they people are taking pictures of the fire. So they go and they talk to them and they select a few and they see their pictures and they hire them. That's how I got hired.
I've got a question for Robert.
Sure.
In the past, I know some photographers get inspired by previous photographers. Were there any fireground photographers that that you had seen when you were starting out that kind of inspired you, or was it just sort of you didn't really have anyone that you'd known about?
No, because I was doing it differently than everybody else. I had the tripod and I was being very slow with my photographs and deliberate. So I got good ones. But I did influence one of the Boston fire departments, a guy named Billy Noonan, and he's gone on to publish 4 books of the fires that he's photographed in the city of Boston. He's quite a good photographer. And so he always kids me by saying, you know, because of you, I became a photographer. So sometimes it goes the other way too.
That's nice.
I just wanted to mention one thing. I'm sorry, when I mentioned raise hand, if you click on participants at the bottom, there's a little button that says raise hand. I can't see everyone because there's so many people. So if you're raising your hand, I can't see you physically. So if you go to participants and you want to use that, there's a button at the bottom that says raise hand, and I see Jim McDonough has his hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. That was a great presentation. I enjoyed the hell out of it. I was actually a buddy of the Boston firefighter who was indicted and did prison time for the Prop 2.5 arsons.
Yeah.
I used to work with him. I actually helped him study for the firefighters test.
Wow.
That was a long time ago. I'm a Boston kid originally. I'm currently in Venice, Florida, while you guys are freezing your butts off up there. I wanted to give a shout out to Russ Carter, who was a longtime FSNE member and a captain on the North Reading Fire Department.
Nice.
David Starkman, he was a 3D guy, a big 3D guy in New England, big part of Stereo New England.
Yeah.
And I also want to say thank you to Dana and everybody else who's making these meetings possible, because I would never be able to hit a meeting in New England while I'm down here enjoying the warmth.
Right.
And it's also nice to see, you know, I'm looking at Marty and Jack and Adrian and some other people. I haven't seen you guys in years, and it's nice to see you.
Right.
That's all I had to say. And Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you too.
That's lovely.
Anyone else? There's a question. Will and Bet Kantrowitz, have you collected your photographs into books? And if so, are any for sale?
No, I haven't done any books yet.
But you'd like to.
But I'd like to, and that's coming up the road a piece, I hope, someday. I've got plenty of material. What you've seen is just the tip of the iceberg.
Because you don't have a website, is that correct, Bob?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So would it be possible for you to type, if people have questions, would you be willing to answer email questions from
Yes.
people?
Absolutely, no
Yeah.
problem.
If you could type your email address into chat for everyone to see, that would be great. Thank you. I don't know how much time we have left. How are we doing, Ben?
I think we're doing pretty well. Let me check on the time here. I would say we have about 10 to 15 minutes left, and what we could do is see if anyone has any more questions specific to Bob, and if not, then we can always have just kind of a general discussion after that for a few minutes and sort of catch up. I did notice that John W had his hand raised.
Yes, go ahead, John.
Okay, I just want to again second what Jim McDonough had said earlier. I think this new Zoom format is working out quite well. Again, in my latter days in PHSNE, we were getting down to maybe 25, 30 people regularly at a live meeting. We're doing at least 50 here because people can attend from far away. This other thing would be more relevant to the older folks in the group. I talked to Dan Jones on Christmas Day, and I asked him what he was up to. His answer was a robust, "Not a goddamn thing," which he's 101. So he's Dan's doing fine. Dan's doing fine. I also talked to Paul Nisela, and he's okay. He's no longer driving, but he's still wheeling and dealing with and having fun with cameras on eBay. The great good news concerning him is that he's got a 19-year-old grandson who is now shooting film. So there is a future generation coming along. He said that he had heard from the parents that the kid wanted a tripod for Christmas. Paul gave him a mint condition tilt-all, and evidently this kid was flabbergasted. The legendary tripod. So, but again, thank you for this is, I think it's a wonderful, photographic presentation tonight, and I really, really appreciate it. So,
Is she gonna ask me?
Thank you, John, for the update on Dan. I'm so thrilled to hear he's alive and kicking, apparently. I haven't seen him in years, but if you see him, tell him Marty Hassel sends your love, will you?
Of course, I can't see him because of COVID. I do talk to him.
Right,
So,
right. But yeah, that's so great. Last time I saw him was 2008 at an opening for my one-woman show in Boston. I was thrilled.
Great. I'll pass that along. He'll love to hear that.
Thank you.
Let me share with you this one story that Pete knows well. I was a photographer and a picture editor for many years.
Well, now you do it.
And when I built my house, I put
It says chat.
Yeah.
Does it say?
I put in a darkroom, and many of my photographers, like Pete Berg, asked why, and I explained to them why, because I had a lot of black and white street photography that I wanted to go back into the darkroom and print. So at a camera store in town, the salesperson tried to interest me in getting into digital. And I told him about putting in a darkroom. And he said, what you do is you get 3 Dixie cups, put Dectol in the first, stop bath in the second, hypo in the third. And you put them on a ledge. And when you're typing in Photoshop, it smells just like you're in a darkroom. So I do appreciate the fact that you do like to print in the darkroom, because I do as well.
Sorry. That's great. Love it. Edith says that Jack Billington has a question.
Jack, you'll just have to unmute if you do have a question.
Yeah.
lower left corner, a microphone, unmute.
Yes.
Jack, just while you're unmuting, oh, Jack's there.
Can you hear me now?
We've got you.
Okay. I just want to say hello to a couple old friends there. I was the second president of PHSNE back in 1976. And I was a charter member, my wife and I. And a couple of my friends there, Dale Loblam, I know him from many shows where we set up next to one another. And Jim McDonough, I know him even from running the elevator in the school over there where we used to go up and down all the time. So I just wanted to say hello to him. And while I'm on, I just want to thank you for sending me an invite to go on here.
It's great to see everybody. I just also wanted to mention that next month, our presentation will be by Nicolette Bromberg, who is the I think she's visual materials curator in special collections at Washington Libraries. And her presentation is on Seattle's Japanese Camera Club, which I believe was formed in the 1920s. So join us next month. That will be the presentation.
Dana, now that we've all gotten a little bit more familiar with our controls, I think we should all unmute and give Bob one more big round of applause for that phenomenal presentation. So if everyone can do that, that'd be great.
Bravo.
Nice job, dude.
Thank you.
So, Bob, this will be up on YouTube in a couple of days. And for everyone else who's not checked out our YouTube channel, you can find it's PHSNE, I believe it's PHSNE-virtual events or something along those lines. If you search for PHSNE virtual events, you'll see us. We've got a few presentations up so far. One about Minox cameras by our very own Vladimir Kazan, who's here tonight. And then we've got one on labor by Steve Dunwell. We had our members presentation, and now soon we'll have Robert's presentation. So please do check it out on YouTube. Dana, do you want to sort of have any closing announcements, or I don't know if Joel has anything to mention, and then I'll stay on until the last few people are off, but I think we could kind of unofficially wrap it up.
Joel, do you have anything you would like to add?
Thank you all for attending. It has been thoroughly enjoyable, and I appreciate the attention you've given us as an organization, and we hope to continue in this path with the Zoom. And actually, I was prompted to consider a brief blurb at the start by an interested member or friend who has something they'd like to share for 5 minutes. So we will certainly pursue that. Thanks again, all of you.
Thanks, Joel. If people would like to present a short share, we usually do 5 minutes or less of a camera or anything of interest you'd like to share with the group before a speaker begins. You can send me an email at programs, programs @phsne.org, PHSNE.org. And we can schedule those, maybe one per presentation. So feel free to do that.
I want to thank all of you members very much for allowing me to present these slides to you tonight. It's been really, I've had a lot of fun doing it, and I look forward to my next show.
And thank you for the warm welcome and all the tech support. It's really much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome.
That's great.
Good night.
Good night, everyone. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Happy New Year to everybody.
Hey, Vlad.
Night, Pete.
Bye.
Bye, Bill.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.